There's been a lot of research coming out lately showing how using social media is affecting us. And today I'm going to share one of these studies that I bet you haven't heard about yet, and that is how using social media can actually affect our fitness. Hey there, I'm Mish, and I am a full-time researcher with my PhD, and I share the results of peer-reviewed research articles here to help you reach your weight loss, fitness, health, and nutrition goals. And I'm talking about social media today, not only because of all the cool research that's been coming out about it, but also because I've been really personally interested in how social media use affects us because of some experimentation I've been doing in my own life, but that's for another video. Anyways, in today's study, the researchers looked at how using social media affected how much weight people could lift afterwards. And what they did was they had both men and women come into the lab and had them do an initial baseline test for how much they could lift. After this baseline test, just to see how generally fit the people were in terms of how much they could lift, they took half the participants and had them use social media for 30 minutes on their phone. So this included Facebook, Instagram, Twitter mostly. And the other half of participants were the control group, and they watched a documentary instead of using their phone. And specifically, the documentary was called Secrets of NASA, which, not gonna lie, I kind of want to watch that now because it sounds kind of interesting. But then after either social media use or documentary watching, they had all the participants then do the final weightlifting test. And this was the critical test where the big result comes from. And for this test, they had the participants do 3 sets of squats with 3-minute breaks in between, and each set was done to failure. So they lifted until they could not lift anymore. And the crazy finding is that the participants who used social media for 30 minutes before that lifting session actually lifted way less weight than the people who watched a documentary. And for the numbers, they found that the people who used social media lifted 15% less than the people who watched documentary. And in terms of the change from that baseline test, they found that the people who watched the documentary were about 15% weaker on average in the follow-up test and the baseline, which makes sense because if you come into the lab, do a bunch of squats, take a break, and do more squats, you're probably going to lift a little less on the second group of squats than the first one. So that makes total sense. But the really crazy / cool thing is that the people who used social media had double the effect of losing strength from the first to the last squat test. So they found that the people who used social media for 30 minutes actually lost 30% strength between the first test and the last squat test. So the people who watched documentary lost 15% strength, which makes sense from being tired, whereas the social media group lost 30% strength over time. So the big finding is that using social media for just 30 minutes before lifting makes you able to do a lot fewer reps before you fail, before you feel like you can't lift anymore. And you're probably asking, well, why does this happen? Why would using social media, just reading tweets or scrolling through Instagram or checking up on grandma on Facebook, why would that cause you to lift less weight? And the researchers looked at a bunch of different variables to figure out why this was happening. And they found that there were no differences between social media users and the documentary people, or between the social media group and the documentary group, in blood lactate concentration, so their physiology in terms of the markers that their muscles are tired were not different. Their perceived exertion was not different, so how much they felt like they were putting an effort was not different between the two groups. The mechanics of how they lifted were not different, so their muscles fired in a similar way. And their perceived motivation was not different. So both groups really felt like they were giving it their all. They both felt like they were putting in the same amount of effort, and their physiology looked the same. So what could it be? What the researchers found is seems like that social media induced weakness is caused by mental fatigue. And I'm going to read you their definition of mental fatigue in case you want a little glimpse of what reading a scientific paper looks like here. They said that mental fatigue is a psychobiological state characterized by a sensation of tiredness and lack of energy that an individual might experience after a prolonged, high-demanding mental or cognitive task. And so what they found is that after using social media, participants reported being way more mentally fatigued and drained than the people who watched a documentary where they actually learned information. So I feel like if you were to be asked what would drain you more between watching a documentary and, casually scrolling through your phone, you would probably guess, or at least I'm sure a lot of people would guess, that the more draining activity would actually be watching a documentary about an area you don't know about. But instead, it was the case that scrolling mindlessly through social media, or however they used it, actually mentally drained them. And this mental fatigue effect is probably what made them lift less, because they just could not get themselves to lift more, even though they felt like they were just as motivated and felt like they were putting in just as much effort. And what might it be about social media that's so draining? And it's not exactly clear why, but I would guess, as a PhD researcher psychologist who publishes studies of my own on actually pretty similar topics, that using social media involves making a ton of decisions all the time. Like when you're scrolling, you have to decide when to stop, what to look at, what to avoid, how to scroll really quickly past ads that you don't want to see, what things you want to like, what things you want to save, what things you want to comment on. So you're just having to make like a ton of decisions per minute when scrolling through social media, like much more than you would in normal paced daily life. And also, I kind of alluded to this, but having to inhibit ads and things you don't want to see actually drains your cognitive resources too. So having to avoid and try to disengage from stuff, especially like negative political content or anything that sort of triggers you, having to avoid that and disengage from that actually spends your limited cognitive resources. So it makes sense that even just doing 30 minutes of that would leave you with a lot less of those resources to spend on doing your workout well. So I hope you found this as interesting as I did, and hopefully you can use it as sort of a life hack when you're lifting if you want to, rather than seeing it as doom and gloom, because social media does have its place, of course, but maybe we should be a little more intentional about when we're using it and how, given that it does have effects on us. So if you liked this video, please give it a like and share if you're feeling generous. It'll really help get this information out there and help more people discover these science life hacks. And also, please subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.